and welcome back to day one of the Mission of Joy Summit. I am just thrilled that you are here with me and my next guest because she is going to address something that we hear so frequently that people struggle with as a huge obstacle to joy, and that is chronic illness and also mental health issues. So Dr. Lisa Marino is a physical therapist and functional medicine provider. She's going to chat with us all things health and joy. So Lisa, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
So for those that don't know you, Lisa, go ahead and share a little bit about what it is that you do in your practice.
Yeah, so I'm a physical therapist, and then like you mentioned, I'm also a functional medicine practitioner. So we really look at the root, the problem of what's going on. And so body, mind, and soul is just a huge fundamental aspect of what we do. So we do all sorts of testing and lifestyle changes and diet, and obviously, treatment of pain as well.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yeah, I think that discovering functional medicine has been such a turning point for me in my health. So I just love coming across other women that really have the faith aspect piece of the puzzle as well, because I think then you have like a truly holistic approach, which is so beautiful.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that.
Do you kind of mix faith in your practice, or is that something that you kind of involve personally but not professionally?
Yeah, so we really tell our clients up front that we're going to go there. So you need to kind of be prepared that maybe not initially if you're not ready, or maybe you've got some hesitation there with I haven't prayed for a while, or I'm really angry at God still. But we believe in order for our patients to truly experience healing, that they need to be ready to go there and be able to heal on all fronts. So body, mind, and soul. And so we kind of tell them up front, we are, a Catholic organization. So we're going to ask you to revisit those places, prayer, forgiveness, confession, and knowing that it's truly, a spiritual healing that we're seeking for them as much as it is a physical one.
Yes, absolutely. That is so beautiful. What a gift to those people in your area. Because remind me where it is that you practice.
Yeah, so we're in Anna, Ohio. So
okay.
small farming community. So that's where we started. We live just north of Dayton area. And then actually my sister is also part of the practice, and she's in the Cincinnati area. So we really try to bridge that gap, in Southwest Ohio. And then, honestly, we're able to really practice and treat all across America. So it's been pretty fascinating there to be able to connect across the country with other Catholic women and families to be able to help them as well, too.
That is incredible. So is that kind of through the telemedicine model that you do that?
Right. Yeah. So that would be virtual.
That's awesome. Yep. So cool. So that is an amazing resource for people that struggle to find a functional medicine practitioner where they are. That was a huge battle for us here. Finally finding someone was so exciting. So we will have links to all of Dr. Lisa's online presence in the caption down below. So if you want to click through and find out more about that, we encourage you to do that. But what we're here to talk about today primarily is two big things, and we can deal with them separately or together, whichever you prefer, Lisa. But the idea of this mental illness that really impedes joy, and also chronic illness where there's pain and discomfort on a regular basis that makes it so hard to feel joyful. So I guess where we can start is it possible for joy to coexist with these things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we can take, the example of not only Christ, but of the saints with that. I mean, so many of them suffered tremendous pain. And so we, can look to them for that wonderful example of how they did that. And they even were, sometimes it's really hard to imagine, but they were even asking for it, so, so don't, be too hard on yourself if you're not there yet. Those are, we're all on a journey, but we know that it is possible then to suffer well and to still have joy in the midst of pain. And so, but we have to have somewhere to start from. And so, yes, that is possible.
Yes, absolutely. So for the people that feel like they are just, oh my gosh, that's just light years from where I am now? How do I even start walking down this road when I already feel overwhelmed by the circumstances that are my reality right now?
Yeah, so I really would like you to leave feeling like you have practical steps. And for our clients that we really talk about this in the way of like barriers to healing, like what could be preventing, my healing, whether it's physical or spiritual or mental. And so there are some really like key things that we look at to be able to start. And, I guess just one of them, for example, is forgiveness. And sometimes that you think like, well, I'm not really like, not really still angry with somebody, or I don't have any unforgiveness. But like when you really dive in, it's like we carry around a lot more than we think. And they've actually done studies. So they looked at, and this is the amazing thing about the work that we get to do, because we see how the truth of the gospel like plays out in our life and in our bodies. So what they did is they studied those that consider themselves to have like high lifetime stress. They're like, yes, like I am stressed out all the time, my entire life. And so then they were able to analyze those that practiced forgiveness, and it literally eliminated any sort of connection link between mental illness and a high lifetime stress. Like they were like, this didn't just like lower it and improved it. There was like virtually eliminated any sort of connection between a high lifetime stress and any sort of effects of mental illness and chronic disease. So we see how important that is on a regular basis. Practicing, forgiveness, because it can just add up, the grudges that we hold, or things, accidents, maybe that something happened that was not your fault. Have I gone through that process of forgiving? So that I would say is, one of the most important first steps that can be important. And I, to that, if you don't mind, it's so important to know that you're not saying that what they did was okay, but you're removing that connection, that it's not going to have a hold on you anymore. And healing it from that perspective, I think is really important, because it can be hard. And gosh, one of our team members the other day, she found this quote from Psalms, and I'm going to probably botch it, but it was like, we cannot forgive without God's strength. So if you're thinking to myself, I cannot forgive this person, well, you're probably not going to be able to do it completely on your own. And part of that, we have to have that resolve to say, okay, I know this is good for me. I know this is good for the other person, and I need God's help. And so we have to be in that place of humility to say, like, I cannot forgive this person on my own. And so I'm going to ask God. And it's a wound. So if it continues to open, we need to continue to forgive until that person still, or that situation does not have a hold on us, any longer. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I was not aware of any of the research about kind of the link to the mental health and chronic illness kind of aspects of that. But I've experienced a version of this to where it's like, well, that makes perfect sense, because I don't know if you're familiar with it. There's this wonderful prayer that actually, it's like just called the forgiveness prayer. I'm sure there's many things called the forgiveness prayer, but this one is, you're supposed to do it every day for 30 days. And it's literally like, tiny type all of the front and the back. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah. I've heard of that.
Yeah. I'll put a link to a copy of it for those that are interested, also in the show notes here. But I went into it much like you said, like, I don't really hold grudges. Like, I'm going to do this for Lent 1 year sort of thing, just kind of, spring cleaning kind of mindset. And oh my, it was not minor, tiny things that were coming up. And it was very challenging, like you're saying, to do the work and to do that every day. And it was very much work to pray it every day. And I think that that's one of those things I hope to normalize, if nothing else, that like, it's not just you. If it's like, gosh, I don't want to do this, and this is not fun. And it's so similar to the physical labor of getting in shape, I feel like.
Right. That's one thing we talk about a lot, is when you're ready for that, is looking at how are you ordering your day with prayer and something like forgiveness, that it becomes a habit. Because if you look at like, the priests and religious, like they're probably examining their conscience like twice a day, because they know how quickly this, can build up, that like, okay, so let that go, They probably didn't mean what they said, but I'm going to recognize that. And really too, if I can add, the model that I follow is, I don't know if you guys have heard of Father Ripperger, Father Chad Ripperger. He's an exorcist. So like, he is my go-to because he's also has his, I want to say his PhD in psychology. So like just a wealth of knowledge. And so he sees, the spiritual pitfalls that we fall into. And so anyway, the way that he explains it and their kind of model for healing is that you're not only forgiving that person and naming it, but you're also saying what it caused you to do. So we have to kind of admit, okay, this person hurt me and it caused me to despair, it caused me to become upset, or I got angry, and then you have to connect, well, yeah, I guess like I kind of was at fault there too, and so like, that's really hard and really challenging, but we have to be able to kind of recognize, and gosh, this is just a theme that comes up constantly, is humility and realizing like how much I need God. But I think that's really important to not lose sight of like, otherwise you're just going to be angry at this person all the time, or this situation that happened, instead of like, well, how did I react to it? And, that could have been a situation that I could have done something differently. And instead I still kind of chose, to feel hurt or to feel depressed or, maybe have a poor attitude instead of like choosing like, okay, and so we can kind of recognize where our tendencies are, that if I get hurt or something happens to me, my tendency is to get angry or to just, stop praying or whatever it may be. And then now we're able to recognize that and see that about ourselves, to say, okay, God, I really need help, with my pride, or I really need help with my anger, because this is what's driving me, down every single time this happens.
Yeah, absolutely. That is such an illuminating connection. I'm just really floored by how much that is, it's one of those things that when you hear it, you're like, of course, like naturally that would be the case, but I have never put that connection together before. And I would venture to guess that many others haven't as well, because even though as Catholics, we have that sense, the body is good, the spirit is good. I think a lot of times we don't put them together very often. Like we also, even though we think they're both good, we also think they're kind of separate.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how you see that expression so much physically. That's so interesting.
Yeah. So obviously that's why, we love doing what we do. And like you were mentioning, the research like, over and over again, it's just kind of revealing itself that, we have to be able to take care of our health and take care of our body in order to, advance in the spiritual life. So the discipline of our bodies will match, kind of the discipline of our prayer life too. So, and I understand, there's probably a lot of us, and myself included, that have been in that place of like, I can't even get started, and so I think that's what we want you to feel, like you have some practical, steps and solutions. We hear you, we know you're hurting. But there is a way out of it. And we know, again, from the example of those that have come before us, that, it's possible, and we can do it with God's grace.
Absolutely. So after really digging into a practice of forgiveness and making this a very internalized thing that happens very regularly, where do you typically go next with people?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I should back up and really, kind of one of the talks that we go through. So anybody that comes through our functional medicine program, we have like these modules that they go through. And so that they're learning these lessons and they're able to apply these. So like before that, I even go through faith and just maybe what lies have we been told. And honestly, this goes back to the fall, of Eve being told like, God doesn't know what's best for you. Like, you can't trust him. Like he's not telling you the truth, and so like, I think that still creeps up for us today to say that like, God doesn't know what's best for you. And, you can do this on your own, and all these sorts of things that still kind of creep in. So revisiting that, where is my relationship with God? Am I still angry, at him for something? Or, obviously God is all goodness and all truth. So he does everything perfectly. It's us that we need to look at, but it can feel like that. So what lies maybe have I been told that I need to kind of revisit scripture, or, maybe talk to a confessor, or, somebody that can say, wait a minute, something, in your thought process there is actually false from what we believe, in the truth. So it can really help to have kind of a sounding board. And I'll get into confession, a little bit later, but I feel like before we can even return to confession, if we haven't been regularly going, like our heart has to be in that place where, I'm ready to, and maybe if you're not even completely ready to, that at least you recognize that you need God's forgiveness and God's grace, and that you're ready to be on good terms with him. So revisiting some of those lies, maybe that, you've been taught about, your faith, or maybe some of the things that are going on in your mind, kind of paying attention to, the verbiage that's going on. I think one thing, if I can share one of my favorite quotes that I found from Saint Teresa of Avila, and this is where I go to. So I'm right there with you. When something bad happens, or maybe, even if I've messed up, and usually it's small things, but it can be big things too. She says, self-love much prefers what is familiar and contained, however miserable, to what is unfamiliar and reliant upon another. But this is the way of conversion, to abandon the familiar and miserable monologue, what I've done and what others have done to me, and instead to be bold and entering into Christ's dialogue, who he is and what he is doing for me. So honestly, that's like where I get stuck, is like, I've done this thing and I'm so bad. I've messed my life up, or, I've whatever, or this thing happened to me and it's just never going to be the same. And so we get stuck in that, and it becomes, if you can think of, we talk about virtues a lot. If you can think about the virtue of humility, of like, humility is in the center. I can tend to be pretty prideful, but on the other end of the spectrum, I can tend to have false humility. That woe is me, and I'm so terrible, and look what I did. And so then now we're also negatively affecting ourselves. And so we've had this false humility, that we're still looking to ourselves, instead of redirecting our focus back to the Lord. And so that would what I would be saying is, gosh, it's so hard. We have to take our mind and take our focus off of the mistakes that we've made or what has happened, and back onto the Lord and what he is trying to do and is doing for you. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I've heard it explained that the false humility is like, we think about it like a spectrum, which is appropriate, but it's also appropriate to think about it like a circle, where there's like pride and humility on opposite sides, because the false humility is back to like, I'm so awful that no one could possibly be as awful as me, which is like not an awesome, thought, but it's obviously still kind of a form of pride, because you're like, I am like the pinnacle of awful. And
you still focus on yourself, which is, Yeah.
I love that Saint Teresa of Avila quote. Is that from Interior Castle?
I think, let me see. That one was from, I think it was on her life. Yeah, in the book of her life. The book of her life.
That is beautiful. That is so true. And I think so illuminating to so many things that we're actually going to, talks we're going to keep sharing throughout this summit, where we are chatting about like really breaking out of that monologue, where we are not allowing our own thoughts to just kind of skitter on their merry way down whatever path they choose, and really taking the reins of that and saying, what's the conversation that Christ wants to have here? So that's beautiful.
Yeah. So if we look at that a little bit further, like if it's, maybe an accident happened or something, and it could have just been pure, evil. But I also really like to use the model of St. Thomas Aquinas. And it's a little bit hard for me to not be able to like share visually, but basically, he kind of lays out how our mind works and how our body works, is that we have the intellect and the will is like up here, and then we've got our memories and our desires and our emotions, and our instincts. And so that's kind of where most of the world is. And like, if you think of like pagans or those that don't believe in God, they're like, just do whatever you want, whatever feels good. And we want to do that sometimes, and you're like, can I just do what I want, Yeah. And at least I think that sometimes. And like when we're living out of that, like my desires, and maybe it's gluttony or hunger, or maybe it's just anger. And so you just want those emotions to come forth. But we know, and how St. Thomas describes it, is like, we as Christians know that there's a higher truth, and that's our intellect and our will. And so we should be able to stop and kind of like recognize, okay, I'm kind of angry about this, but like, what is the good here that needs to happen? And so if we can recognize that, like, okay, I'm making a decision out of my emotion, or maybe I'm just still stuck in this memory and I have kind of a, convoluted view of that. Okay. Like whatever thing happened, maybe I was abused, or maybe there's some sort of trauma, and I'm stuck in that memory that's clouding my ability to see the good. Okay. Those need to be healed. And so that's where, if you have somebody you can chat with about, is this either a friend that can help me see this, or do I need to start talking about maybe some counseling or somebody to be able to see, or a spiritual director, be able to see the bigger view, to be able to heal that memory, heal that wound, to see, well, they were under a ton of stress, or, okay, maybe this is just pure evil, and I just, do need to forgive them for that. Doesn't mean that it's right, but how can I heal that memory that I'm not stuck, in that place that I can't see things from my intellect and from the good that God wants to see. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think that that's when we're struggling with forgiveness about those deepest, hardest things. I think that so often it can feel like it's hard to forgive, in part because you don't want to be vulnerable again. And I think that that's part of where therapy and others' input can be so helpful in saying, like, you don't have to not take the lesson. Like, you don't have to, have a relationship with this person, whatever the case might be. Like, you can really forget and keep the boundaries in place that are going to allow you to move forward in joy. That's not going to mean that you're just back to the same, vulnerability or whatever it was that kind of created the opportunity for the situation in the first place.
Yeah, that's the thing about it is, forgiveness does not necessarily mean like reconciliation, where you have a relationship either, and that can be kind of challenging, but you also need to kind of protect yourself, too, which is okay, being a Christian. Oops, sorry. Yeah, that's great. And so one of the other, oh, go ahead.
Nope, you go for it.
Yeah, so hopefully that kind of made sense with, St. Thomas Aquinas. I know that can kind of be, hard to follow, with that, as far as, being able to heal, those wounds. But we do like to go through that process in order to kind of help people, see things differently. And again, what we kind of try to look at also, as far as like the mental health thing, is that, and this is where we have to be willing to kind of look at our thoughts and how are they directed. And so one thing that when we go through, we actually have a free course on healing the mind online. And we met with Dr. Joe Lepetsky. He's just fascinating wealth of knowledge. He's also on the Exorcist resource team for Father Ripperger. And so, so he actually has his PhD. And so he describes, that we have our back brain. We have, if you think of our amygdala and all of our threat centers that are just going off. And so if you've had a trauma, or you do have pain that's going on, your body is anticipating it, it's expecting it. And so we've literally changed the way that our brain has thought and kind of been hardwired to anticipate those threats, to expect things to hurt or to be negative. Instead, we also have the front of our brain that is really more the rational, is more like common sense, and can think things clearly, and so when we're so stressed out, we can't even really switch into that common sense and just higher level thinking. We're so focused on the threat and the pain, and that it takes 60 seconds to let that wave of cortisol, wash away, that we can actually take a thought. And so there's so much that goes into that we have to be able to kind of slow ourselves down. Journaling, meditative prayer, can you slow those thought processes down and really be present? But also just recognizing, this statement just sticks with me. He said, if you are constantly using that back brain and just your thoughts are rolling from that, it's such a state of negativity that you will drive yourself into depression. I'm like, that's so freeing, because if we just listen to that voice all day long, it's it's going to hurt, it's going to happen, oh, watch out for that, and you're just constantly putting out fires. Yes, your mind is going to just drive yourself down. And that's not to say that's your fault. That's just how our brains are wired,
Exactly.
And we have to be able to recognize that and kind of say, no, we're going to fix this. This is going to work out, but you got to be able to pause. And so things like social media, you got to be careful with things, our phones that are constantly going off. Am I taking, time for prayer when I'm ready, and able to? Am I, quieting down, spending time with a walk or something that I can do that will kind of slow the mind down a little bit? Does that make sense also?
Yeah, absolutely. When I learned this concept, it was explained to me like, this is the part of your brain that was created to help us run from lions. And so when you're in these states of constant stress or constant pain or whatever the case might be, your brain is always like, we are running from a lion. And they're like, you're not exactly going to be living with joy, starting orphanages while your brain is running from a lion.
Yeah.
This is, just kind of incompatible physically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we literally have gone from instead of those short bursts of a threat or you're saying running away to all day we're just here. It's the bills and the kids and the deadlines and we're just high stress all the time. And so I would say part of those other things of healing is addressing what can I practically either remove, what are my priorities? Because I mean, honestly, there's just so many pressures. And so we need to be able to slow things down. So, are there things that I can remove so that I can lower my stress? What can I give off, to somebody else and delegate? But also I really like writing down those fears or those stressors. What can I practically do? And this really helps kind of break down, like I was saying, kind of back brain, front brain. What can I practically do to address this stressor or this fear? And then what do I need to be able to give up, to God and trust in Him? Because that gives you your next step, your next best step, instead of this big thing. What am I going to do? I can't even figure out my next step. Okay. Do I need somebody to help me with that? Because it's so overwhelming. Do I have a friend or spiritual director or, a counselor? Is it time for that I can't even see the next step? But then can I start to train myself that okay, this is the issue. This is my next step. And then this is totally out of my control. And I need to trust and I need to work on, spending time trusting, trusting God and knowing Him. And goes back to those lies, God, He does want the best for us. He knows what's best for us. And what lie am I saying that I'm going to take care of it and I'm in control? And that's really hard.
Yes, it is. And those lies are so pervasive in our culture because a lot of, many reasons, but one of the things that I see the effect of so much is this kind of new approach to atheism, where it really, it's like God is just a bigger guy in the sky that's imposing something on me, almost like he's some kind of dictator or totalitarian in some way. And so there's that rebellion of you can't tell me what to do. We're all just kind of teenagers down here, trying to assert our independence. And that just, even if we have maintained a life of faith, I think that framing of God seeps in sometimes, where we kind of, we still acknowledge Him and love Him and want to have this loving relationship, but there's still that sense of but He could just be kind of a person who has kind of whims that might not be for me, and really having that clarity about the truth of who God is versus the lie of, the God that they're refuting is not a God that I believe in anyway, can be helpful in kind of sticking to those truths, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think being able to address that, and again, having the accountability, whether it's a women's group or again, like I said, a spiritual director or counselor, or a friend that is kind of on that same journey, and you're going to keep challenging each other, to read books together. Or, I mean, you just, unfortunately, the thing that we usually do is just kind of recoil, I'm not going to pray, I'm not going to read, I'm not going to, and I'm just going to create space there instead of well, what does Jesus say in the scriptures, and what do the saints say about that? I think that's the most encouraging thing, because they've had that wrestling in their mind of God, how can you do this, sort of thing. And then you see them come out of it to say, oh my gosh, I had the exact same thoughts, and they just, it's really encouraging in that respect. But, how can you keep yourself accountable? Because those same issues are, going to continue to come up as we grow in our faith. And that's one thing I wish somebody would have told me years ago, it's not that it's just going to be hard, but those hard times will come.
Mm-hmm.
There will be darkness, and those are a sign of growth. And
Yeah.
even when you don't feel God's love, the truth is still there. And so
Mm-hmm.
we can't always rely on that feeling, but we have the truths of the faith that we want to continue to dig into.
Yeah, absolutely. And the accountability, like you're talking about, is also
Mm-hmm.
what can be so helpful during those, like, my feelings are not really here right now,
Yeah.
having the outside voice, because
Mm-hmm.
again, it's whenever we let just kind of our internal monologue drive what's happening that we kind of get ourselves into trouble, whether it's when things are good or whether when it's struggle.
Yeah, because honestly, that's a sign of growth. Like we
Mm-hmm.
know, like that is going to happen, because the
Mm-hmm.
more that you feel like he's pulling away, he's just allowing you to grow, and to
Mm-hmm.
not rely on maybe, some of the consolations, but to say, okay, how far are you going to go, for my love? And so we just have to try to keep sight on that we're gaining heaven,
Mm-hmm.
and gosh, it could be hard. And I was really glad I think there's like a contemplative group that I found that said, like, or I forget which quote saying it was, but it was basically like, okay, if you are really struggling, needing those consolations, it's okay. Like, beg God, ask for him,
Yeah.
continue to plead with him. Like, Lord, I
Mm-hmm.
really need you, but then to also look at maybe what are the ways that I have, like I mentioned, created some barriers,
Mm-hmm.
that like, okay, do I really want all of Jesus and all of what he's giving, to me? And so
Yeah.
that's why we look to confession, and look to, unforgiveness, and look to
Mm-hmm.
some of those ways that maybe I've separated myself, from God, that you're maybe not feeling that in that way. I think it also really helped. I don't know. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there we go. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. It also helped
Yes.
me the other day. Sorry. I had was just kind of struggling myself the other week, and came across this quote from Saint Gianna, and I think just to remember the dignity that he has given us, especially as women, with who we are, and what our mission is. And she said, Saint Gianna was a wife and a mother, and she was
Mm-hmm.
also a physician, and she was a part of like a women's group. And so she said to them, I ought to have the divine life in me to be able to communicate it to the souls that surround me. Let us often think that with grace, with Jesus in our hearts, we are alter Christus, another Christ. We will
Mm-hmm.
certainly not only keep from committing sin, but we will bring joy everywhere, the fragrance of Christ.
I
And so I
love
love that. Yeah, to remember, like, God wants to be inside of us. He
that. Mm-hmm.
allows us, to participate, in the divine life in the Eucharist every day if we can.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is
Absolutely.
empowering to say he wants to be inside of me, even if I don't necessarily want to think that he does want to be inside of me, because I don't think I'm worth
Yeah.
it. God thinks that I am worth it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that quote speaks so beautifully to just what it is that we are looking to help foster through this summit and through the other things that we do, because it's that idea of being a missionary of joy, where there is something fundamentally different about not only us, but also the way that we show up to our lives because we know Jesus. And it's like we've said, it's not because we have some special power. I'm the happiest person. I'm so magnetic, magnanimous, whatever the case might be. It's because we should not be able to like encounter Christ and have him come up against these places where we need healing and let him heal us and not be changed on the other side of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's not easy, certainly, but it's absolutely worthwhile. And so I think we have to remember that's the dignity that he's given us. And honestly, like, the devil knows how important women are. He knows like our role. He knows how important it is, to have strong families and great marriages. And so we shouldn't be surprised when those things happen, that we feel attacked in that way. And so, we can rely on the Lord, like you said, to bring that to us. But I think recognizing when I need help
Yes.
and being able to admit that, whether it's, like I have mentioned before, different resources and a friend, and allowing ourselves to take the time to pray and to heal, and take care of our bodies too, so
Absolutely. And that's it. It ties in with part of what kind of motivated me to start this summit in the first place, is because there was just this monstrous amount of controversy when we posted this quote from Billy Sunday that said, "If you have no joy, there's a leak in your Christianity somewhere." And so many people were very hurt by that, very offended by that, because they're like, well, does that mean that, because I have a mental illness, I'm not really Christian, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that something that is so important to include in the conversation is that's kind of a sign. Like, without joy, we know that there's something gone wrong somewhere, but that shouldn't be like a surprise, or that shouldn't be like, how could this happen? Like, oh my goodness, what, I'm the first person that this has happened to. Like, this is, like you said, expected. Like, we know that there are going to be these things that we struggle with. We know there's going to be trouble along the way. And when we have those, times where we aren't experiencing the joy, instead of that being a like, look at how awful I am, or I'm a bad Christian, or something like that. It's to say, like, where is the leak here? Like, literally, like, if you have a bowl that is, empty of water over and over again, like, let's watch and see where this is coming out, and let's see if we can address that.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And that's why, I mentioned humility so much, because it just takes, like, if, especially reading St. Teresa of Avila, is like, you better know that each, step that you take, like, it's going to take more humility, because it's going to be not only less of me and more of Christ, but I'm going to have to continue to admit where I've gone wrong. And like she talks about, just know yourself, and being willing to say, okay, this part of me is trying to just be tempted, like St. Paul says, like, when I'm in the flesh, like, I'm of the world and I'm of sin. And when I'm in the spirit, like, I'm of God. And so we have to be able to, like, that. It's so hard. It's so hard to do that.
Yeah. And that's, like you said, I mean, I always come back to the accountability and having people to go with that you are just really transparent with. Like you had said, whether it's friends or counselor or professional, something like that, because it is just so easy to really hang our hats on the times where things are going well, and then to feel like all is lost. If there's a change, or if they're not, or if you feel like they never have gone well, to just say, well, this is just hopeless. What hope is there? And having other people speak into that can be such a powerful thing. Like this summit, hopefully, where there's an opportunity to have people speak into the reality of your life, wherever you are, whatever's going on in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think I was just listening to a talk the other day, and I think things like this are going to be, so pivotal, because if we don't keep that message in the forefront of our minds, that, we are worth it, and it's going to take some work, but, we are all in this together. That fellowship that unfortunately we just haven't had a lot of this past year, then we really lose out, and our mind will suffer, because we're hearing the negativity, we're hearing all the stress, and we're not hearing, any of the good. And unfortunately, it takes work, and it takes, trust. But I really like that image of the leak, of like, okay, well, where is, and that's a perfect way to think about, like health, whether mental or physical or spiritual, like what is driving the bus here,
Yeah, absolutely. And that's such the functional approach, is like, let's really look at everything and not just make the assumptions about, well, it's probably, et cetera. And I think that that's so beautiful to have that inform how you approach the spiritual life.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think too, just to kind of speak to that, if you're struggling, like, there's so much more that we can know and understand about the brain to understand, like, okay, this is not just me. Like, there's a process that is broken down, and we can actually see that, in functional medicine. I don't know how much testing you've gone through, but it's just fascinating to see.
Yes.
We can look at mitochondria. We can look at your energy levels. We can look at, energy from, like, actual energy production of mitochondria. And its processes. We can, actually know, like, well, there's a breakdown here in your dopamine, and that's significantly contributing to this, lack of focus or attention,
Mm-hmm.
and on and on and on. So
Yeah.
there's so much more that we're attributing, in diet and in toxins
Mm-hmm.
and all of that contribute to that. So that's why it's like we just have so much hope, every day, because the mood and the depression and the anxiety is so tied in with what we see in gut health, and then it just kind of spills over. So before you kind of like blame yourself or get frustrated and aggravated, it's like there's still so much hope. There's still so many options out there. So that's what I love to do, and it's what's so fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's helpful too to have in our minds that like there's going to be an order to things that's going to come along, and it's going to be a process, and it's not going to be all at one time. Because what happened for me is after I went through kind of my functional medicine process, there were some things that I needed to do that I wasn't ready to do the physical things yet, because I really had to do some emotional things to like get to a place where I could accept what it was that was being asked of me. And that was really hard for me. Like I had a really, really hard time accepting like that I couldn't just like flip a switch and do what I needed to do now. And I think that that's something that, happens on a lot of fronts. And I guess it's accepting that it's not a pharmaceutical. It's not the same as like, take this, which is such our mindset. And I think we apply that to spirituality as well. It's like, what is the like, devotional book for me to read? What is the whatever that's going to be the switch flipper, when it's so often like, we're going to go on a 6-year road trip here. It's like, fantastic.
Well, that was almost my mindset, like thinking about some of the nutrition stuff like years ago when we, kind of started looking at this. I'm like, it's going to take how long, or it's, what I mean? And now it's like nothing, to think about some of those changes, but it can be so overwhelming. And I think that's partially why God kind of hides that from us, because don't you think we wouldn't even go there if we knew how much it was going to take and how long it was going to take? You'd be like, yeah, right. So I think that's why, things are hidden sometimes for us. And like, we only get like a little bit at a time, because that's probably the only amount of steps that we can actually handle, for the given moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But also it's okay that that's the case. And I think that that's like an important message that you're sharing with us, is like, this is going to be a whole thing, and we expect it to be a whole thing, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think just, try as much as you can. This is another one that they've done studies on, gratitude, they're starting to research, like in the hospitals, people do well when we are, applying, spiritual health, to those that are sick. And then gratitude goes the same way, that those who practice gratitude do have better improvements in their health. And they're like, I do it all the time, well, we've got to figure out where the other leaks are, like you said before. But if you're not practicing gratitude regularly, and I feel like it's an easy one that will just kind of slip out for me, but, is it before bed? Is it in the morning? Is it once a week? That's another one that's an easy thing to kind of add to your day. Like, wait a minute, like before I have all this negativity, I need to kind of, again, shift my mind, shift my focus, to praise. So
absolutely. And that there's always something to be grateful for.
Yeah. I think that's, unfortunately, especially when it comes to chronic illness and chronic, mental health, that, we realize so much more and more how much God really is in control, and how much, we are out of control. So, and I don't mean that in a sense of like, I don't have any control. He allows us to make decisions. He gives us responsibility. We can order our day, we can do all these things. But as far as like circumstantial things, God is going to be in control, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being with me today, Dr. Lisa. It has been such a pleasure to talk to you. And I think that it has been very helpful for me, and I hope for people watching as well. I'm sure it has.
Yeah, I hope so.